At exactly 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time on May 6, 2026, a U.S. Navy FA-18E Super Hornet launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln, flew low over the Gulf of Oman, and opened fire on a massive Iranian-flagged oil tanker with its M61 Vulcan cannon. The cannon fires 100 rounds per second. The rounds tore into the rudder of the MT Hasna, disabling it completely and leaving the ship dead in the water, unable to steer, unable to reach its destination. That was the first shot. It was not the last. And the military forces now scrambling across the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Oman, and the broader Persian Gulf represent the most concentrated naval confrontation the world has seen since the Cold War. This is not a single incident. This is the escalating reality of the most strategically consequential maritime confrontation of the 21st century, and the details of what has been happening ship by ship, crew by crew, cannon round by cannon round, in the waters around Iran over the past 3 months tell a story that most people are only beginning to understand. Let us start at the beginning of this specific chapter. On March 1st, 2026, just days after Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th, with the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran and the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, Iran made the most audacious strategic move in its modern history. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps closed the Strait of Hormuz. IRGC vessels swarmed the waterway. Iranian drones and missiles struck commercial ships. Mines were seeded into the narrow shipping lanes, and a shipping war erupted that sent the global maritime insurance industry into crisis and drove oil prices above $120 per barrel within days. On that same first day of the closure, an oil tanker called the Skylight was attacked 5 nautical miles north of Qeshm in Oman, killing 2 crew members and injuring 4. The Hercules Star, an oil products tanker flagged from Gibraltar, was struck near Ras Al Khaimah, killing 1 person. The MKT Vayom, a Marshall Islands flagged oil tanker 17 nautical miles northwest of Mina Sakhr in the UAE, was hit by a projectile that sparked a fire. The Stena Imperative, a U.S. flagged oil products tanker, was struck in Bahrain at 2 in the morning, killing 1 crew member and injuring 2 more. Multiple other vessels were attacked in the same 24-hour period across the Gulf of Oman, the Strait, and the approaches to major Gulf ports. March 1st, 2026 was a declaration of maritime war. The U.S. response came in stages, each more forceful than the last. On March 19th, the United States launched an aerial campaign against Iranian military targets specifically focused on Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. and Israeli aircraft dropped 5,000-pound bunker buster bombs on hardened Iranian anti-ship cruise missile sites along the strait. U.S. forces simultaneously sank 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels as they were in the act of laying mines in the shipping lanes. On March 23rd, CENTCOM announced that U.S. forces had destroyed an Iranian anti-ship missile site, an Iranian drone launch site, and 2 IRGC patrol boats that had fired on commercial vessels. The combination of airstrikes and naval engagements during this period represented the largest U.S. military action against Iran's naval forces since Operation Praying Mantis in 1988. But Iran did not stop, and the confrontation escalated. Israel, operating alongside the U.S. in this conflict, assassinated Alireza Tangsiri, the IRGC naval officer personally overseeing the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The killing of the admiral responsible for coordinating Iran's maritime offensive was designed to disrupt command and control of the mine-laying and shipping attack operations. Iran replaced him and kept fighting. On April 13th, after the Islamabad talks collapsed, Trump imposed a full U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, a formal declaration that the United States Navy would prevent Iranian ships from moving oil in or out of Iranian harbors. Trump announced Operation Project Freedom on May 3rd, stating that the U.S. would protect commercial vessels transiting the strait. 6 Iranian small boats that the IRGC launched against U.S. escorted vessels were immediately destroyed by CENTCOM forces, and then the individual ship confrontations began to define the human texture of what naval blockade enforcement looks like in the modern era. The MV Tuska is where that human texture became impossible to ignore. The Tuska was an Iranian-flagged container ship attempting to move toward Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary commercial port, in defiance of the U.S. blockade. The guided missile destroyer USS Spruance tracked it, issued multiple warnings, and gave the Tuska's crew a full 6 hours to comply with blockade orders. The crew refused every warning. After 6 hours of shadowing, the USS Spruance fired its 5-inch Mk-45 naval gun at the ship's engine room, multiple rounds, specifically aimed at disabling propulsion and stopping the vessel without sinking it. The ship ground to a halt in the Gulf of Oman. Then the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship, launched Marine helicopters carrying members of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. The Marines fast roped down onto the deck of the Tuska, rappelling directly from the helicopters onto a live vessel that had refused U.S. authority and took physical custody of the ship and its crew. CENTCOM published a video of the operation. Trump described it on Truth Social with his characteristic directness. The Iranian crew refused to listen, so our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engine room, and then our Marines boarded the ship. The Tuska was redirected away from Iranian waters. Iran's first Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref responded to the Tuska seizure with a statement that laid out Tehran's position with complete clarity. Either a free oil market for all, or the risk of high costs for everyone. Stability in global fuel prices, he said, depends on a guaranteed and lasting end to economic and military pressure against Iran and its allies. That is not a conciliatory statement. That is an ultimatum from a country that is simultaneously losing a naval confrontation and trying to convert the pain of that loss into diplomatic leverage. Iran cannot win a direct naval engagement against the U.S. Navy. What it can do is make the strait so economically costly that the international community pressures Washington into concessions. Every ship attack, every mine, every drone strike on a commercial vessel is not just a military act. It is a data point in a campaign designed to demonstrate that the strait cannot function without Iranian cooperation. Then came May 6, 2026, the day of the MT Hasna engagement. The Hasna was an Iranian-flagged oil tanker, unladen, meaning it was empty and heading toward you. Iran presumably to load up with oil for export in violation of the blockade. CENTCOM spotted it transiting toward the Gulf of Oman and issued multiple warnings. The crew of the Hasna ignored everyone. An FA-18E Super Hornet operating off the USS Abraham Lincoln, the same carrier that has been the operational hub of U.S. strike operations throughout the Iran conflict, was dispatched. The Super Hornet shadowed the Hasna, transmitted additional warnings, and then at precisely 9:00 Eastern Time, opened fire with the M61 Vulcan 20mm cannon at the ship's rudder. The cannon fires depleted uranium, or high explosive incendiary rounds, at a cyclic rate that can disable the mechanical steering systems of a maritime vessel with a short, controlled burst. The rudder was destroyed. The Hasna was left unable to steer, adrift, functionally immobile, and removed from its blockade-running mission. It was the first time in the current conflict that a U.S. Navy aircraft had physically disabled a surface vessel using cannon fire. The aviationist noted directly that this was, as far as publicly known, the first case of an aircraft being used to directly disable a ship as part of the blockade action. Naval warfare doctrine was updated in real time by an FA-18 gun run over the Gulf of Oman. 2 days later, May 8, 2026, the confrontation escalated again. U.S. forces fired on and disabled 2 Iranian oil tankers in a single day after exchanging fire with Iranian forces in the Strait of Hormuz overnight. The UAE simultaneously reported another Iranian missile and drone attack on ships in the region. CENTCOM stated that it had thwarted Iranian attacks on 3 U.S. Navy ships and struck Iranian military facilities in response. The ceasefire that Trump had announced on April 8th was described by multiple officials as on life support. And the military forces scrambling across the strait were no longer managing a one-off incident. They were managing a running battle in one of the world's most consequential bodies of water. The economic consequences of everything described above are felt by every person on Earth who buys fuel, food, or any product that relies on supply chains dependent on oil. Before March 1st, 2026, approximately 25% of the world's seaborne oil trade and 20% of all liquefied natural gas moved through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. When Iran closed the strait and began attacking commercial vessels, that flow stopped. Major shipping companies suspended operations. Insurance providers added war risk clauses that made transit economically prohibitive. Hundreds of supertankers stacked up outside the Gulf waiting for some indication that it was safe to move. Oil prices broke above $100 per barrel, then above $120. The shipping disruption added its own layer of inflation to everything those vessels were carrying. Not just energy, but goods, industrial components, food commodities, and the raw materials that fuel global manufacturing. Every day the confrontation in the strait continued. The financial cost to the global economy compounded. The new Iranian Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who took over following his father Ali Khamenei's assassination, publicly vowed to keep the strait closed. That vow, combined with the ongoing IRGC attacks on commercial vessels and the seizure of container ships by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy, signals that the maritime confrontation is not approaching resolution from Tehran's side. Iran's IRGC Navy seized 2 container ships on April 22nd, claiming maritime violations, a transparent legal pretext that the ship's operators denied. Iran described them as vessels flagged under various third-party registries that it accused of facilitating the U.S. blockade. The international maritime community described the seizures as acts of piracy under the cover of manufactured legal justification. Neither the International Maritime Organization nor any significant maritime legal body has recognized Iran's claimed authority to seize vessels in international waters under the circumstances. Operation Project Freedom, Trump's announced initiative to provide U.S. Navy protective escorts to commercial vessels transiting the strait, was launched on May 3 and paused on May 6th after just 3 days, when Trump announced on Truth Social that it was being temporarily suspended while the U.S. worked toward a diplomatic agreement with Iran. The pause did not stop the confrontations. On May 8th, 2 more Iranian tankers were disabled. On May 20th, U.S. Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit intercepted and redirected yet another Iranian-flagged commercial oil tanker suspected of evading the blockade. The operational tempo of ship interdictions, tanker disablements, and marine boarding operations has become a near-daily feature of the Strait of Hormuz in May 2026. Each incident generating its own diplomatic crisis, its own military scramble, and its own set of questions about where the ceiling of escalation in these waters actually is. The U.S. Navy's posture in the region represents a commitment of force that has not been seen in the Gulf since the early 1990s. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier, Strike Group, approximately 15,000 personnel, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, guided missile destroyers, cruisers, and supporting vessels, has been the operational backbone of both the strike campaign against Iran and the blockade enforcement mission. The USS III amphibious assault ship, with its embarked Marines from the 31st MEU, has been the instrument of ship seizure and boarding operations. 2 Avenger-class mine countermeasures vessels, Thebe, USS Chief, and USS Pioneer, were returned to the Gulf region specifically to support the mine-clearing operation in the Strait. Additional Allied naval forces from the UK, France, and multiple partner nations are operating in the theater. The combined naval presence in and around the Strait of Hormuz in May 2026 is the largest concentration of Allied naval power in the region in decades, and Iran is still fighting. IRGC speedboats continue to harass vessels. Drone attacks on commercial shipping continue. The mine threat in the strait persists. U.S. officials confirmed that fully clearing Iran's mines would likely take 6 months even under optimal conditions, and Iran retains the ability to lay additional mines from speedboats in a matter of hours. The Shadow Fleet tankers that Russia and Iran have used to circumvent sanctions continued, attempting to move oil despite U.S. interdiction, with Ukraine also striking Shadow Fleet vessels at Novorossiysk in the Black Sea in a separate but parallel disruption of the same illicit shipping network. On every front, in every body of water, connected to Iran's economic survival, the pressure is simultaneously building. The massive ship near Iran that was bombed on May 6th is one episode in a confrontation that has already produced dozens of ship attacks, multiple vessel seizures, a marine boarding operation, 3 Iranian tankers disabled by U.S. naval gunfire, 16 Iranian mine-laying ships sunk, an aerial campaign that destroyed Iran's anti-ship missile sites, and a naval blockade that is costing Tehran an estimated $500 million per day in lost oil revenue. The military forces scrambling in response are not scrambling because they were surprised. They are scrambling because the pace and the scale of the confrontation has made the Strait the most kinetically active body of water on Earth, and every escalation step taken by either side requires an immediate operational response that the other side then has to react to in turn. The MT Hasna is disabled in the Gulf of Oman. The Tuska is in U.S. custody. 2 more tankers are sitting disabled after May 8th's exchange of fire. Iran's IRGC naval commander overseeing the blockade is dead, killed by Israel. Iran's new supreme leader has vowed to keep the strait closed. Trump has threatened bombing at much higher intensity if diplomacy fails. The mine-clearing operation is 6 months from completion. And every supertanker captain in the world is watching a situation in which the most important maritime choke point on Earth is simultaneously a battlefield, a diplomatic pressure point, a legal dispute, and a daily operational crisis that is being managed at gunpoint by the most powerful navy in the world, against an adversary that has nothing left to lose and everything to gain from keeping the chaos going as long as possible. The sailors and Marines executing these operations are operating in a threat environment that has no clean precedent in recent American military history. An FA-18 pilot who fires on a tanker with a 20mm cannon is not flying a combat air patrol over a conventional battlefield. He is executing a precise, legally framed interdiction under rules of engagement that require multiple warnings, documented evidence of violation, and a specific intent to disable rather than sink. The Marines who fast-roped onto the Tuska did so knowing that the crew had already refused 6 hours of U.S. warnings, and that whatever was waiting for them on that deck could include anything from armed IRGC personnel to booby traps to a crew that decided to resist physically. They boarded anyway. That is what the enforcement of a naval blockade looks like in practice, not the clean imagery of carrier operations and air defense tracking, but Marines with rifles fast roping from helicopters onto a commercial ship in the Gulf of Oman while their government's diplomatic team tries to negotiate an end to a war in a hotel in Muscat or Islamabad. The foreign policy implications of what the U.S. is doing in the Strait of Hormuz reach far beyond the immediate U.S.-Iran confrontation. Every nation that imports Gulf oil has a stake in the outcome. China, which imports approximately 1.7 million barrels per day from the Gulf region, has been watching the U.S. blockade with the specific concern of a country whose economic growth depends on energy supplies that are currently being managed by an adversary's naval force. India, Japan, South Korea, and the European Union are equally exposed. The alternative pipeline and transit routes that countries have been scrambling to develop since the strait closed, Iraq's $1.5 billion Basra to Jordan pipeline, expanded overland routes through Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are not yet operational at the volumes required to replace Hormuz capacity. In the meantime, every day the confrontation continues. Oil prices remain elevated, inflation persists, and the political pressure on governments dependent on affordable energy intensifies. Russia's position adds another layer of complexity that the daily operational reporting from the Strait rarely captures. Russia signed a strategic partnership treaty with Iran in January 2026. It has publicly opposed the U.S. military campaign and the blockade. Its Shadow Fleet tankers have been attempting to move Iranian oil in violation of U.S. sanctions, tankers that Ukraine has been striking at Novorossiysk, while the U.S. interdicts them at the Strait's entrance. The same network of sanctioned shipping operators, shell companies, and opaque vessel registrations that has been circumventing Western oil sanctions against both Russia and Iran is being simultaneously attacked from multiple directions. U.S. Navy forces in the Gulf, Ukrainian drones in the Black Sea, and Western financial enforcement agencies tracking the beneficial owners of the Shadow Fleet. The Iran confrontation is not isolated from the Russia-Ukraine war. The two theaters are connected by the shared logistics infrastructure of sanctioned oil trade, and both sides of both conflicts understand that connection. The ships that are being bombed near Iran are not abstract military assets. They are commercial vessels with crews drawn from the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and a dozen other countries, whose citizens signed on to transport oil and goods and found themselves in the middle of a major power confrontation. The Hercules Star crew that survived a projectile strike near Ras Al Khaimah on March 1st. The Stena Imperative crew member who died at 2 in the morning in Bahrain when a projectile sparked a fire on a U.S. flagged tanker. The MKD Viam crew who battled fire after a projectile hit their vessel. These are the human costs of the maritime war that the geopolitical coverage rarely names. Every ship attack generates an insurance claim, a crew welfare report, a maritime union statement, and a family notification. The total number of commercial vessels attacked, damaged, or destroyed in the first weeks of the Strait closure runs into the dozens. The cumulative human cost, among crews, among port workers, among fishing communities in coastal areas where the economic disruption has been devastating, is orders of magnitude larger than the casualty figures from the naval engagements themselves. Trump's Project Freedom paused after 3 days because diplomatic channels signaled enough movement to justify not escalating. But the confrontations continued anyway, because Iran kept probing the blockade with tankers and the IRGC kept launching drones and small boats at U.S.-escorted commercial vessels. The pattern emerging in the Strait of Hormuz in May 2026 is one of parallel tracks. Diplomacy through Pakistani and Omani intermediaries, trying to construct the one page MOU framework and daily military enforcement operations that disable ships, board vessels, and destroy Iranian naval assets, while both sides insist the ceasefire is technically still in effect. It is the most surreal simultaneous contradiction in current global affairs, a ceasefire that allows FA-18s to fire on tankers, Marines to board ships at gunpoint, and Iranian drones to attack U.S. escorted commercial vessels, all while diplomats in hotel rooms 3 countries away are discussing the terms of a permanent peace agreement. The massive ship near Iran that was bombed is not the last ship that will be bombed. The military forces scrambling in response are not standing down. And the confrontation playing out in the 21 miles of water between Iran and Oman is not moving toward resolution at a pace that anyone, Tehran, Washington, the global shipping industry, or the hundreds of tanker crews anchored in the Gulf waiting for clearance to move, finds acceptable. The world is watching a naval war being conducted inside a nominal ceasefire, with oil prices above $100 per barrel, marine boarding operations happening weekly, an Iranian-flagged tanker fleet being systematically disabled or seized, and a diplomatic framework struggling to generate the one-page agreement that could, in theory, make all of this stop. It is not stopping yet. And every ship that tries to run the blockade is about to find out exactly what the USS Abraham Lincoln's Super Hornets are still doing in the Gulf.